Taiwan number 1. Hey everyone, Dennis Chang here. Welcome to another video. So what you just watched was an arrangement, some kind of arrangement anyway, I did on a piece by Edward Grieg, and it's a piece called Norwegian Dance. Actually, Norwegian Dance number 2, which is a tune that Django Reinhardt had recorded back in the day, a number of times even. And I changed certain things to make it even more, well, quote-unquote classical influenced. A lot of it was improvised, and I had a general idea about the direction of the harmonies, but the choral accompaniment itself I did in the beginning was improvised, and during the violin solo, the arpeggio thing that I did was also improvised. And basically in this video, I want to share with you how I learned to do all this. And before we get started, as always, if you could hit like, subscribe, and even comment or share, it would make a huge difference for me because it takes a lot of preparation to make these videos, because these videos, I think I can say, are quite detailed. Or if you want to make some kind of financial contribution, well, you can check out my courses on SoundSlice or DC Music School, or even Buy Music. You can find links in the description box. In this video, notably, I'll be talking a lot about harmony, and I do have a very detailed harmony course on SoundSlice. The first volume is 100% free, so definitely check that out. I think it's a unique course. Not many people have done the research that I've done over the years. That is the historical research by listening to classical music and early jazz from the 1920s, 1930s, figuring out the harmonies, figuring out the evolution of how certain chord progressions evolved over the years and became what they are today. Okay, let's get started. So basically, we're going to talk about certain basic classical principles just to whet your appetite. If I were to go really in depth on this topic, well, this video would last several hours. Hopefully, it'll inspire you to start checking out composers from the previous generations and get some ideas for your jazz improvisation. Now, whether one likes it or not, European music played a strong role in the development of jazz. In recent years, there has been this discussion on what people call musical colonialism. And this video won't be talking about that, but whether you like it or not is just a fact that in the early days when African American slaves were able to get their first formal musical education, it was through European music. Of course, they also had their own traditions, which were passed down orally and from generation to generation. And gradually, their tradition transformed and was mixed in parallel with the European tradition. And eventually, through this, I guess, organic process of mixing, it eventually led to the first sounds of jazz. The main thing I want to say about this is that the earliest kind of music education one could get in America was that of the European tradition. So you have solfege, major, minor scales, arpeggios, Chopin, that kind of stuff. There was no jazz education as we know it today. No talks about chord scale theory, tritone substitution. No, it was basically a classical music education. So very elementary classical music education. And this is a tradition that evolved over many centuries, and it still even subconsciously affects how we make music today. A lot of the influences in sounds are often in our subconscious. So in this video, I'm going to talk about all this and basically cover general concepts. Hopefully, it'll give you an idea on what to look for when you start checking out some of these composers like Bach, Mozart, Chopin, Beethoven, etc. The first thing to understand is that the European classical system evolved with certain rules. And these rules were decided, I would say arbitrarily. The people who decided these rules had their own reasoning for making up these rules, but in actual fact, they have no basis in objectivity. One rule was that parallel fifths sounded bad. What are parallel fifths? Let's say the notes C, G to the notes D and A. Does it sound bad to you? By today's standards, it doesn't sound bad, right? In fact, by today's standards, this is like the foundation of rock music. Yet in those days, it was considered quote-unquote wrong. So whether one likes it or not, that was the rule that was decided. And it was such an important rule that it had subconscious effects on how people learn music for many generations to come. Let me give you an example. At one point in history, the composer Claude Debussy had a conversation with one of his former teachers, and they were talking about the nature of music and such. And then his teacher was talking about rules, these rules, and things that you couldn't do, quote unquote. And basically, Debussy replied, and I paraphrase, pretty much said, forget the rules. The only thing that matters is what sounds good to me. This is very interesting to note because for generations, and even still today, we are subconsciously limited by language and what was established arbitrarily many generations ago. What I mean to say is that his teacher, and for sure many other musicians in those days, just obeyed the established rules. And suddenly here comes this revolutionary, among others, who said, wait a minute, why not just trust my instincts? Who made up these rules anyway? Because Western music started with these rules and they lasted for so many generations, decades, if not a few centuries. Many of these rules subconsciously continue to find their way in today's music, in varying degrees, of course. Of course, nowadays, there's significantly more flexibility. So with regards to harmony, everything evolved from the concept of voice leading. In fact, before there was Western harmony, tonal harmony, there was just pure voice leading through counterpoint. So one thing to understand, there is a general meaning of voice leading and counterpoint. And then there's a strict definition if we're looking at music of a certain era. The general definition would be the following. Voice leading is basically the study of how each voice in a harmony moves when going from one harmony to the other. And often there is some kind of smooth connection, often a mix of stepwise or common tone motion. Skips are generally limited to short intervals with the exception of the bass that can have slightly wider skips. So let me give you an example, that will be better. Here's a G7 chord. I'm playing the notes G, F, and B. And we have to resolve to the C chord. So good voice leading would be the following. The B would resolve to C, and the F would resolve to E. And the G, it's the bass, would want to jump up to C, or down to C, but I don't have enough strings. So you have this. That is what we consider, quote unquote, good voice leading. Bad voice leading would be if I took the same chord, if I played this, and this note B jumps up to E, this note F jumps up to, let's say, C, and this G up to C. So that's what we would consider bad voice leading. Does it sound bad? Not necessarily. But the former example, the correct voice leading, played a huge role in how music evolved over the years. Counterpoint is closely related. So it's basically the study of independent movement of each voice working together to make music. In other words, if you have two lines of music happening at the same time, two melodies, it is the study of their independent movement. And if it were not independent movement, that means that the voices move in the same direction every time. Let me give you an example. Here's a C major scale harmonized in thirds. So you have two voices, this voice and this voice, and it goes like this. Beautiful, but that's not counterpoint. Everything is going in a similar direction with the same intervals. In counterpoint, you have a number of motions. I'm just going to simplify here. You have similar motion, which is what I did. It's all thirds, but sometimes it's a major third, sometimes it's a minor third, but they're still thirds. Then you have parallel motion. It would be the same thing as similar motion, but the intervals are maintained. So let's say perfect fizz. That's parallel motion and considered illegal back then. And then you have direct motion. It's where it's going in a similar direction, but the intervals change. So basically you have, let's say, major third, then perfect fifth. That's direct motion. And then you have contrary motion, which, as the name implies, means that the voices are moving in opposite directions. So let's say an octave. There we go. The C, the first C goes up to D, and the second C goes down to B. And one great example you can check out is this Bach bourrée. So contrary motion. And then you have oblique motion. So you have one note staying the same while the other note moves. Let's start with this. Beautiful. So, depending on the era and thus the style of music, there were some fairly strict rules about how certain notes can or should move. It almost becomes like a puzzle. And in fact, in those days, many composers would send each other voice leading and counterpoint puzzles to solve. I'm not going to address any of these strict rules because if I did, I could easily spend many hours talking about this. And quite honestly, I only retain the general essence of things. to apply into my own improvisation language within the context of jazz. And that's what I want to share with you in this video. If you truly want to get into the strict rules of all this, you have to find a classical teacher who specializes in just that, or you have to go to classical music school like I did. So from a practical point of view, as far as jazz guitar is concerned, the general ideas of voice leading or counterpoint are the foundation of my entire chord knowledge. Personally, I've never studied things like drop 2, drop 3, drop 2 and 4 and all that stuff. Of course, I can figure them out, and I have figured them out at one point, but if you're trying to tell me like play a drop 3 voicing of C major 7, it would take me a little bit of time to figure it out. In fact, let's put this to the test. What's a drop 3 voicing? So let's take a C major 7. Drop 3, this is the third voice. Down an octave. Okay. Yeah, I've played this before. It's a voicing that I know. So that's not how I came about learning chords. And if that's how you learned or you want to learn, it's totally fine. I'm just talking about myself. But the way I learned about chords was merely through experimentation and some of these classical concepts that I'll share with you. Basically, like most guitar players, I learned a number of must-know shapes, like everyone did, you know, C, A minor, all these, and then a few quote-unquote jazzy chords, etc. But then what I did was I started to manipulate the notes within the voicings to see what different results I could get. So if I had a G7, back in the day, I would have fun just like changing this note. Came up with this G7, sharp 5 or flat 13, G13. I came back to this G7. If I just lowered this, G6. So a lot of my core knowledge came from this experimentation, and this was very beneficial to me because instead of learning just a grip, I learned how each voice of a grip functioned. I knew that this was the third, this was the major 7, this is the third, root, major 7, third, 5th. I talk about this method in my harmony course on Soundslice, the jazz guitar harmony course. The first volume is free, so check it out, and please buy the second and third volumes, and then future I'll release the 4th, 5th, etc. It's a very, very, very detailed lesson series, and I'm very proud of it. Then what I would also do, so if we came back to this chord, so I knew this is the third, the root, the flat 7, the third, and the 5th. I would take each note and then move them up one interval. So it's basically 1, 3, 5, flat 7, right? So the 1 would become 3, and this would become 5. Sorry, not 5. The flat 7 would become root, and after the B comes D, after the D comes F, and then you end up with this. You end up with this. And if you continue, you end up with this. So my entire core knowledge came from this kind of experimentation. So I've been doing this for a very long time. So I've gotten fairly proficient at it. There's still, of course, room for improvement, but for the most part, I've developed the muscle memory to come up with a lot of intricate chords on the fly because I've been doing this for so long. And then the next thing I would do, I would take chord progressions, usually from standards, and start experimenting with voice leading. So if we took a song like All the Things You Are, the first chord is F minor. So let's say this is my initial voicing. Now let's see, what do I have to move to get to a B flat minor? Beautiful. So we have oblique motion. This stays the same. This goes up, and this. And here I'm not following strict rules of voice leading like back in the day. Then from here we have to get to a E flat 7. We have to get to A flat. Then we have to get to D flat. So what do I do? So I played the notes A flat, C, A flat. This note, I did this scale run, and this I went up. It's a beautiful contrary motion and oblique. has to become a G7. Etc., etc. So this is the kind of thing that I did, and it helped me a lot to understand harmony and why certain chord progressions exist. Let's try There Will Never Be Another You. So E flat is the first chord. Next chord is the way most people would play it. It's D minor 7 flat 5. I'm going to keep this note. Then to G7. And then this note. Within the same chord, voices can move. So this G. Then now we have to get to a B flat minor. This has to become a E flat 7. A flat minor. E flat. C minor, and then A7, then F minor 7, E flat 7. So I improvised all this, and of course I use simple chords in the beginning just to show you, but I can use more intricate chords and create more intricate voice leading. And again, keep in mind that I don't necessarily follow the strict rules. We'll talk about that later, but let's say if I took, let's do it again. Here's another cool example. Let's say 1 6 2 5, the 6th dominant in G. So what did I do? I made this up. Okay, went from 3 voices to 4 voices, but it doesn't matter. Because like I said, I'm not really strict about this. So E7, well here's an E triad, here's the 7th, then A minor, and chromatic connection to D7. Let's do it in the key of C. One 4/5 chord progression in A minor. Here, in this position. Position for fun. So, like I said, while nowadays most musicians, myself included, are not so strict with the rules, there are still certain things that are worth knowing from the days of strict rules. And they are the following. On a dominant chord, let's say we're in the key of C, so the dominant chord is G7. When you have this 7, which is F, we have to resolve to C. It wants to resolve downwards to E. We have the note B, which is the 3rd of G7. It wants to resolve upwards to the root of C. And finally, well not finally, then you have the note D. It can either go down to C. Sounds familiar, right? Or it can go up to the note E. So this note D that goes up to E. Over the generations, eventually musicians discovered you can put a little chromatic passing tone. And that's how we come up with the augmented. This is what I mean when I say I came to understand how certain chord progressions came to be. I got to investigate the tiny cells, the voice leading. So these are very strong voice leading tendencies that have been in place since pretty much the beginning of Western harmony. These are very useful to know because they're still used today. However, if we follow the principles of Debussy that we should only play what we feel like playing, then of course you have other options. And especially in jazz nowadays, when people start to crave more and more creative sounds, they start to find different ways of resolving than the traditional ones. So for instance, when we have this augmented chord, which is supposed to go up to the third here, well, we can also go down to the major 9. So you have a 2-5-1 with a minor 9th, D minor 9, G7 augmented, C major 9. And you have this voice leading. So let's say we're in the key of D minor and we have the dominant chord. Now, the third is supposed to resolve to the root, right? But what if we went down? To the sixth. So you find these creative resolutions. So nowadays, there is quite a lot of room for creativity, but these creative methods of voice leading came as a reaction to the traditional forms of resolutions. And they still follow certain principles of voice leading, namely logical motions. Logical motion, for example, this third C sharp, instead of going up, it went down. It's not like we approach the B note from out of nowhere. In fact, in jazz music, the 2-5-1 chord progression was born out of voice leading as well. Okay, it came from classical music, but if you study early jazz, there's an evolution to the 2-5-1 chord progression. And if you want to know about this, you can check out my harmony course. So now I want to show you some cool classical style voicings. So you may have seen me use this voicing a lot, right? It's a very common classical voicing. So if we do in C, it's basically root, 5th, 3rd. So basically, the first chord tone, then you skip the next one, which goes up an octave. And if you go through the permutations, the inversions, you end up with. And of course, you can do it in minor as well. So this voicing is very common in classical music, and you hear it, for example, in the Bach prelude, the famous cello prelude. It starts with that voicing. And then it goes through voice leading to the next chord, which is C. Then D7 with a G pedal. And then back to G. So that's a very, very useful voicing to know. So then, of course, you can change one note. Let's say the G, change to an A. So we have a C6. So it's now a 4-note chord. The G is implied. We don't have it in this voicing, but when we go through the permutations, we'll encounter it. So I'm making this up on the spot right now. And then this note is going to go up here. This note's going to go up here. And this note here. So now we have the 5th here, the G. We continue. This note goes up. And this note goes up here. This goes here. So then we have, and then this goes here, this goes here, and then this goes here, and this goes here. Back to the top. So you can easily spend many hours just doing this with different chord voicings, different chord families. And don't forget the usefulness of oblique motion. So check it out, a 2-5-1 in the key of G. Let's say A minor. We have to get to D7 and we're going to use oblique motion. Check this out. So from A minor, it goes down to this note. And then from this, it goes down here to D7, D9, and then oblique motion within the D7. If we want to be quote-unquote jazzier, so So they have this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then G. Cool, huh? Let's take that example of the 1-4-5 progression in A minor, which is minor swing, Django Reinhardt's minor swing. So A minor, D minor, and then D minor going to E7. We're gonna resolve the way we did earlier, but except for this note is gonna stay the same. So now we have this beautiful sus sound, and it gives rise to this ornament. It's a very, very beautiful ornament over an E7 chord. It's a very common device in classical music used by famous composers like Yngwie Malmsteen. How's it go? I don't know how it goes. Yeah. But anyway, all these things that I learned from harmony give me ideas for improvisation, for lead playing. We'll talk about that later. So let's move on to the next idea. This is what we call horn fifths, because these are usually played by the horns. Something very Legrand. What are the notes? We're in E, and G sharp, and then a B power chord, and then an E chord in first inverted. Okay, one thing to address now is that the guitar has certain limitations due to the intricate counterpoint or voice leading, and especially the ones that are based on strict rules. These are extremely difficult, or sometimes even impossible to execute on the guitar. So even if sometimes I'm in the mood of following some of the strict rules, I do it with quite a lot of freedom. So let me give you an example. This is the Bach chaconne. Oh, I made a mistake there. Do you notice where? Chances are you don't, right? I think it actually doesn't sound bad, but I cheated here. So from this A7 chord, I did not resolve the way it was supposed to be resolved. I resolved it this way. So basically it's supposed to resolve like this. This note C sharp has to go up to the note D. This note G has to go down to the note F, which I did not do. I just played A7 to this D minor voicing. So the note G never resolved properly. And I added an extra voice, which is this voice here. It's not supposed to be there. It was supposed to resolve like this. That would have been the proper way to resolve it. And that's what it says in the sheet music. Of course, this one is doable on the guitar, but there are other voicings in music that are probably impossible to play. But chances are when I played that first example, your ears didn't go like, whoa, 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 something sounds wrong, right? So that's what I mean, that you can use quite a lot of liberty here. Let's look at another piece, like Chopin, the Nocturne in E flat, the famous one. I think Opus 9, number 2. Okay, so this is originally composed for the piano. So obviously the guitar is no piano, and there's some of these voicings, cluster voicings that he used, that are just not playable for solo guitar, but I'll follow roughly the principles that he used. So you have da, dee, da, dee, da, da, da. It's beautiful. This kind of da, 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 da. It's beautiful. Sus. Da, 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 da. Chopin. What was the chord progression? It was 1, 4 minor, back to 1, and then this beautiful oblique motion to C7, to F minor. It's a jazz progression. Just 1, 4 minor, 1, 6 dominant, 2, 5, and then kind of like this deceptive cadence. It doesn't resolve to E flat, but it goes the B flat through voicing, it transforms into a G7, C minor, and then sharp 4 diminished, then B flat sus. Oh, so beautiful. Then you have that Bach Chopin that I told you about earlier. So this is from the, I believe, violin partita, I want to say, BWV 1004, D minor. I could be wrong. This is the last movement. It's a very long piece, and at one point it goes into a major key. And you have this passage that goes like this. It's really, really beautiful. So it's originally for violin. So I'm going to have to read this because I don't know it by heart. And I'm a guitar player. Guitar player that reads music, get out of here. So I may make mistakes, but let's see what happens. Getting complicated. And then that was not bad for sight reading. You have to read many voices at the same time, then figure out the fingerings, which is, it's not easy on the guitar. Like on the piano, you only have one place to play the notes. Here on the guitar, I have to figure out, oh, which fingering am I going to use? So let's analyze this. It's really beautiful. It's not complicated at all. So it's in D, and it starts in D, like this. A7, B, B minor, and then E minor over G. Then what we call 164 in classical music, which is basically the ancestor of the 251. And then 1 again. So what do we have? 1, 2, 5. Those are the lyrics. 1, 2, 6, 2, da da. The what we call the 164, which is A sus. So basically 1, 5, 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. Same chord progressions as jazz music. So I got a lot from listening to Baroque music, Baroque composers, especially Bach. So here's another one from, if I'm not mistaken, BWV 1003. I think this is a sonata in A minor, and this is the Andante movement, which is in C. And you have something that goes like this. Once more, I have to read because I don't know the whole thing by heart. It goes like this. And then, oof, gosh. etc., etc. Hey, that's not bad sight reading for a guitar player. But let's just look at the first few phrases. It's just a C major chord. Da, da, di, da, 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 G7, 5, da, di, di, da, 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 1, da, 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 and da, da, D7, da, da, G. So what do we have? 1 to 5 to 1, 6, 2 dominant. Man, it's jazz music. Why does this matter in jazz? Well, for starters, it teaches you to comp in a more musical way because you're focusing on individual notes rather than chord shapes that you memorize and then you just plug and play. It's actually a whole lot more work, but I think it's super rewarding, and the more you do it, the better you get at it. And eventually, you can also develop some muscle memory for certain common chord progressions. And all this that we looked at, these are the foundations of my knowledge of harmony. How I learned to comp in jazz comes from this study that I did. And as I mentioned earlier, for those of you who are interested in improvisation, lead guitar or lead improvisation, it gives you many pathways for improvisation based on these voice leading concepts. Basically, for me, comping and soloing are two sides of the same coin, and they influence each other. For example, there's this chord progression in Night and Day that Cole Porter liked to do. It's this descending chromatic chord progression, which Django used in one of his compositions called Djangology. So in the key of G, it's this chord progression: C sharp minor 7 flat 5, C minor, G over B, B flat diminish, A minor, D7, G. So maybe you'd be tempted to play these crazy arpeggios. But what if you can find a melodic way to play based on simple voice leading? So check this out. There Will Never Be Another You, just like freestyle improvisation. Classical music is so beautiful. So another thing that comes from classical music are ornaments. So earlier I showed you over that E7, this ornament. And there are a lot of things like this. For example, so this ornament and others. So a lot of these classical ornaments are the predecessors of the bebop ornaments that we find today. Wow. If you want to know about ornaments, I have this course on SoundSlice about developing bebop lines, and I talk about the evolution of some of these building blocks and how we came up, well, not we, but how the masters came up with the lines they came up with. It was all a very organic process, and there was a natural evolution. Check out the course. You know what? Leave a comment, like, subscribe, share. So basically you have so many tools for improvisation or even just accompaniment arranging that came from classical music. So let's end this video with what I did in that intro video, this Norwegian dance thing. I had a basic idea of where I wanted the chords to go, but the voicings themselves were improvised. And I'm a bit lazy to go back and watch what I did, but I can come up with something else, maybe even a few different options. So the initial chord progression that I'm thinking of is D, G minor, D, G minor. Play like this. Sing. Bop your head like this too. Then 3, 5, 6 dominant, 2. Again. Oh yeah, groovy. D, D7, G, G minor, 1, 6, 2, 5, 1. Okay, so that's the chord progression that we use. And then I did some manipulation. So the melody goes something like this. Da, 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 dee, dee, da, 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 dee, da. So what did I do? D with an A bass for fun, because it sounds cool. G minor, 6. And then through voicing, I came up with this D chord. It looks like a D7, but I'm not thinking of it as a dominant chord. It's just voice leading to avoid a large skip. That's what I want to do. D, G minor, then D, F sharp. So in what I was thinking originally, there was no F sharp, but this is a voice leading thing. B minor, and then B minor 7. And then instead of E minor, I have this E major chord because the melody allows it. A7, G bass, the 3, B7 is a B7, classical B7 voice, E minor, A7, A minor 6, or F sharp minor 7, flat 5, B7, E minor, and then check this out, this is voicing. So this C7, E minor, C7 to A7 over C sharp, this comes from voice leading. I talk about it in my harmony course and also in some of my other YouTube videos, but it's a cool thing that Django did. Then D, D7, and then some jazzy G major, and then G minor, I got this from flamenco musician. D, F sharp, which is not in the original progression, but I added it as a voice leading trick. Oh, beautiful. B minor over A. And here, it's supposed to be E minor, first inversion, but I played a G chord because it's easier on the fingers. I can just do this with parallel fifths. Let's do another version. Let's see what happens. Yeah, let's start like this. Sorry, I improvised this, so I don't know what I did. Hopefully you can do use the slow down feature, or maybe I can transcribe it on SoundSlice or something. Let's do another version. Let's see, what should I start with? Start here. And then during the violin solo, I did this thing. Well, I don't know what I did because I improvised it, but it follows the same principles. Let me improvise another one for you. Following, in my head, I have the basic chord progression, so maybe if you need to write it down, write it down. Then I came up with this. Maybe I should do it section by section so I can remember what I did and explain to you. So D. So I know we're in the key of D major, so I have these little melodies. So I already forgot what I did exactly, but it was this voicing, to this voicing, to this voicing, to this. And on top I added some like scale passage. Next part, 1. And I do that, I can add that F sharp 7, so 1. F sharp 7, so E minor, B minor, so oblique motion, E minor 7, and how about A augmented, A minor 6, B7, oblique motion, E minor 7, A7, F sharp minor 7 flat 5, A7, E minor, no, A7, D, D7, G, G minor, D, F sharp, so E minor. Let's do another version. So D, G minor, D, G minor 6, D, F sharp 7, E minor, E minor, A7, A minor 6, or F sharp minor 7 flat 5, the same. Oblique motion, E minor, A7, A9, and then F sharp minor 7 flat 5, D7, E minor, oblique motion, D, D7, G major 7, G minor 6, D, F sharp 7, B minor, wow, I love classical music. So there we go. Hopefully this was kind of useful to you, give you some ideas, or maybe make you curious about checking out some classical music. I only checked out what I like, and I like Bach, Mozart, Schubert, Paganini, Chopin, what else do I like? Liszt. I like quite a lot of composers from the 19th century. And I also got into opera and all that stuff. It's like Rossini, some of the Mozart operas, and checking out how some of those melodies work and how the harmonies work behind them. So the accompaniment is especially really, really cool in classical music because they're all composed and meticulously arranged. But definitely check out Bach. Some of those solo violin pieces I talked to you about, some of the organ pieces, the keyboard pieces, full of counterpoint, or the choral music for choir. So you have these things called Bach chorales. So I really suggest you check them out. Just go on YouTube, type Bach, B-A-C-H, or as we say, Batch, and chorale, C-H-O-R-A-L-E, Bach chorales. These are often short pieces for choir, and it's often similar as jazz, but like simple chord progressions, and you can see each voice doing the voice leading and the counterpoint thing that I talked to you about. So a lot of ideas you can take from them. So yeah, that's it. like, subscribe, buy my courses, buy my music, check out the link in the description, follow me on Instagram, and there we go. See you in the next video. Bye.